So, you ever stop and think about what's actually happening when you save a file? Like, you download a meme, you save your game, you finish a school paper, and poof, it's just there. Forever. Where does it go? Is it floating around in the computer case? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on this magic trick. We're diving deep into how storage actually works. And don't worry, I'm going to explain this like you're 5. No big, scary words. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how your computer remembers all your stuff, from your secret cat photos to your 100 gigabyte games. Part 1. The language of computers, on and off. Okay. First thing you gotta know. Computers are incredibly simple. Actually, they're dumb. They only know 2 things, on and off. That's it. We call this a bit. Think of it like a light switch. A 1 inch is the switch being on, and a 0 inches is the switch being off. Every single thing on your computer, every photo, every song, every word, is just a super long sequence of these ons and offs. When you group 8 of these bits together, you get a byte, and a single byte can represent 1 character, like the letter A or the number 5. So when you see a file that's a megabyte, that's roughly 1,000,000 of these little groups. A gigabyte is 1,000,000,000 of them. Your computer is basically just a giant library of light switches. The whole job of a storage drive is to remember which switches are on and which are off, even when you unplug the computer. Part 2. The old school hard disk drives, HDDs. Alright, let's talk about the classic, the old workhorse, the hard disk drive, or HDD. If you have a desktop computer or an older laptop, you probably have one of these. The best way to think of an HDD is like a tiny, ridiculously fast record player. Inside the metal box, there are these shiny, spinning platters. They look like little CDs or records stacked on the top of each other. These platters are coated with a special magnetic material, and floating just above them is a tiny little arm with a read-write head on the end. This is like the needle on the record player, but it never actually touches the platter. That platter is spinning thousands of times a minute. If the head touched it, it would be a disaster. The head is literally flying on a cushion of air thinner than a human hair. So, how does it store the ones and zeros? Magnets. The read-write head has a tiny electromagnet. To write a 1, it sends a magnetic pulse one way, and to write a 0, it sends a pulse the other way. It's basically changing the magnetic direction of tiny, microscopic spots on that spinning platter. To read the data, it just flies over those spots and senses which way the magnetic field is pointing. And it's doing this millions of times a second. That's how it saves your files. It's a physical, mechanical process. That's why you can sometimes hear an old computer whirring or clicking. That's the sound of the platters spinning and the arm moving back and forth. It's amazing technology, but because it has moving parts, it's slower and can break if you drop it. Before we get to the third part, I wanted to remind you to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Well, that sounds a lot to ask, but I'll appreciate it. I love you. Part 3. The new kid solid-state drives, SSDs. Now, let's talk about the new hotness. The solid-state drive, or SSD. These are in most new laptops, phones, and gaming consoles. The name solid-state literally means it has no moving parts. It's all electronic. Forget the record player analogy. An SSD is more like a gigantic, complex grid of microscopic light switches that can remember their position even with the power off. Inside an SSD are memory chips called NAND flash memory. Within these chips are millions of tiny cells. Each cell has something called a floating gate, which you can think of as a tiny jail for electrons. To store a 0, the SSD pushes electrons into this jail. To store a 1, it pulls them out. The electrons get trapped in there and will stay there even when you turn the power off. When you want to read the file, the drive just sends a little jolt of electricity through the cell to check, hey, are there any electrons trapped in there? If yes, it knows it's a 0. If no, it's a 1. Because there are no moving parts, no spinning platters, no moving arms, it can find and read this information almost instantly. That's why computers with SSDs boot up in seconds and programs open right away. The downside? It's more complicated to make, so it's traditionally been more expensive than a hard drive for the same amount of space. Also, those little electron jails can wear out over time after being written to thousands and thousands of times. But for modern SSDs, you'd have to be writing massive amounts of data every single day for years before you'd ever have to worry about that.